Snow fell steadily on the train platform in Copper Ridge, Colorado, as 26-year-old Elizabeth Fairmont stood clutching her worn leather suitcase, her cream-colored wedding dress now dampened by the mountain snow. The train's whistle had long since faded into the distance, leaving her alone on the platform as the winter evening settled around the small frontier town. Elizabeth had traveled from St. Louis to marry Thomas Brennan, a mine foreman who had arranged their union through carefully worded letters that painted a picture of a stable life in the growing mining community. But as the hours passed and no one came to claim her, the harsh reality began to settle in. She had been abandoned before her wedding day had even begun. The station master, an elderly man named Henry, had checked his records twice and shaken his head sympathetically. "I'm sorry, miss, but there's no record of anyone expecting a bride on today's train. Are you certain about the arrangements?" Elizabeth pulled out the letters and telegraph messages that had brought her across the country, reading them again in the dim light of the station's oil lamps. Everything seemed in order, but Thomas Brennan was nowhere to be found. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Elizabeth faced the terrifying prospect of being stranded in an unfamiliar town with limited funds and no clear plan for survival. She had burned her bridges in St. Louis, giving up her position as a governess to pursue what she had hoped would be a stable marriage and new beginning. That's when she heard the sound of horse hooves on the snowy street. A man on horseback approached the station, his dark coat dusted with snow and a silver star visible on his chest, even in the lamplight. Sheriff James McKenna dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post before approaching the platform. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of his position but also genuine concern. Henry sent word that someone was stranded at the station. Elizabeth looked up at this tall, weathered man who appeared to be in his mid-30s. Noting the kindness in his eyes despite the serious expression that seemed permanently etched on his face. "I'm Elizabeth Fairmont. I came here to marry Thomas Brennan, but it appears he's had a change of heart." Sheriff McKenna's expression darkened at the mention of Brennan's name. "Miss Fairmont, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Thomas Brennan left town 3 weeks ago. Word is he headed to California with money he borrowed from several local businesses, including funds he claimed were for wedding preparations." Elizabeth felt the bottom drop out of her world as she realized she had been not just abandoned, but deliberately deceived. The wedding that was supposed to provide her with security had left her more vulnerable than ever. "I see," she said quietly, struggling to maintain her composure. "I suppose I'll need to find lodging until I can arrange passage back to St. Louis. Miss Fairmont, the hotel is full up with miners and their families, and frankly, a single woman traveling alone might find herself in an uncomfortable situation," Sheriff McKenna said carefully. "Would you be willing to consider an alternative arrangement?" Elizabeth looked at him warily, her experience with Thomas Brennan having taught her to be cautious about trusting men's promises. "My late wife Margaret used to run a boarding house for respectable women, teachers, nurses, and the like," he continued. "The house has been empty since she passed 2 years ago, but it's furnished and warm. You could stay there while you decide what you want to do next. Sheriff McKenna, I appreciate the offer, but I have very little money to pay for lodging." "The house is sitting empty anyway," he replied, "if you're willing to help keep it maintained and maybe assist with some of the town's administrative work. We need someone who can write well and manage records. Consider it an even trade." Over the following days, Elizabeth settled into Margaret McKenna's former boarding house, a well-appointed 2-story home with individual rooms for residents and common areas for meals and socializing. Sheriff McKenna had been honest about the arrangement. The house needed care, and the town needed someone with her education and organizational skills. What he hadn't mentioned was how much he needed the company. "James," Elizabeth said one evening as she helped him review the town's financial records, "why did you really offer me this arrangement? It can't just be about needing a bookkeeper." James was quiet for a long moment, considering how much honesty their growing friendship could bear. "Because I know what it's like to have your life plans fall apart through no fault of your own. When Margaret died from fever, I thought my world had ended. If good people hadn't helped me through that time, I don't know what would have happened." Elizabeth studied his face in the lamplight, recognizing the deep grief that still shadowed his eyes. "How long were you married?" 8 years. "We were trying to start a family, but—" He paused, the pain still evident. Margaret was everything good about this town. She helped every person who needed it, and when she died, something vital went out of this place. "Is that why you became sheriff? To help people the way she did?" "Partly. Also because someone needs to make sure men like Thomas Brennan don't prey on decent folks who are just trying to build honest lives." As winter deepened into spring, Elizabeth and James developed a partnership that went far beyond her official duties as the town's record keeper. She helped mediate disputes between families, organize supplies for struggling miners' families, and gradually took on many of the community support roles that Margaret had once filled. James, meanwhile, proved to be nothing like Thomas Brennan or the other men who had tried to control Elizabeth's life through manipulation and false promises. He valued her opinions, sought her advice on community matters, and treated her as an equal partner in the work of keeping Copper Ridge safe and prosperous. "Elizabeth," James said one evening as they walked through the town's main street, observing the progress of new construction and growing businesses, "I want to tell you something that might change our arrangement." Elizabeth felt her heart quicken, understanding that this conversation would define her future in Copper Ridge. "I'm listening. I've come to depend on you not just for the work you do, but for the perspective you bring to everything we face here. You've helped this town heal in ways I didn't think were possible after Margaret died." "James, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'd like you to stay permanently, not as someone passing through while recovering from disappointment, but as someone who chooses to make this place home." Elizabeth looked at this honorable man who had offered her shelter when she was abandoned, who had valued her contributions to their community, and who had never asked for anything in return except honest work and genuine partnership. "Are you proposing marriage?" she asked directly. "I'm proposing that we build something together based on what we've already discovered works between us. Mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that the best relationships are partnerships where both people can be their authentic selves." Elizabeth smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought her from abandonment at a train station to this moment of being genuinely chosen by someone who knew her completely, James McKenna. "I accept, but with one condition." "What's that?" "That we're clear this isn't a marriage of convenience or charity. If we're going to do this, I want it to be because we've chosen each other freely, not because we're settling for what's available." "Elizabeth, what started as helping someone in need became caring about someone important, and then became loving someone essential to my life. There's nothing convenient or charitable about how I feel about you." 2 years later, Elizabeth McKenna stood in the same boarding house where she had first found refuge, but now it served as a genuine haven for women new to Copper Ridge who needed temporary housing while establishing themselves in the community. She had transformed not just the building, but the entire support system for families facing difficulties in their frontier town. "You know what I learned from that night at the train station?" Elizabeth said to James as they prepared for bed in their home above the sheriff's office. "What's that?" "That sometimes when one door closes, it's because we're meant to walk through a different one entirely. Thomas Brennan's betrayal felt like the end of my world, but it was actually the beginning of the life I was meant to live." James smiled, pulling his wife close as they looked out at the thriving town they had helped build together. "And I learned that sometimes helping someone else is exactly what you need to heal your own broken places. Sometimes the most important rescues happen not when someone saves us from immediate danger, but when they offer us the chance to discover who we're meant to become when we're valued for our authentic selves, rather than accepted as consolation prizes." If this story reminded you that our greatest disappointments often redirect us toward our true destinies, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to remember that being unclaimed by the wrong person makes room for being chosen by the right one. Subscribe for more stories about second chances and finding purpose through service to others. And let us know in the comments about how an unexpected change in your plans led to something better than you had imagined. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships begin when someone offers us not just shelter, but the opportunity to contribute our gifts to building something important together.